Well, good morning and welcome to this virtual walk around the parish of Rendcomb. And as you can see from this first slide, there are several walks that I've described in a little booklet, which is available either by filling in an order form on the Churn Valley website, or you could just pick one up when the parish churches are open again. The Churn Valley Way is shown by this solid black line which runs from Seven Springs in the north all the way down the valley to Cirencester, and about halfway along the route, the village of Rendcomb is a real hub for the community. About half the route consists of quiet country lanes and bridleways and can be done on a mountain bike, but then you do have to push it along the footpaths. And the parish of Rendcomb is skirted by the A435 running alongside the River Churn. And today's circular walk is shown by a dotted line and can easily be followed with the aid of an ordnance survey map. From the main road, there are glimpses of Rendcomb College, which sits on in a magnificent position above the valley. And here's an aerial view with a dotted red line showing a road leading steeply uphill and into the village. There's usually some parking on the roadside before reaching the village hall. But I should also point out that the car park a little bit further up the hill is for residents only. Just a bit of a summary that the circular walk around Rendcomb is enjoyable, I would say, any time of year. It's only about 3 miles long and would take less than 2 hours to complete. Rendcomb is apparently named from the attractive valley or coombe just south of the village. And at the time of the Norman conquest, the manor passed from Alaric, the Saxon chief, to William the Conqueror, who then gave it to the Berkeley family until in 1635 it was taken over by the Guise family. After visiting the ancient parish church and having a look at the college, the route descends to the bottom of the valley alongside the River Churn before going steeply uphill to a wonderful viewpoint, which you can see in this slide. It then goes across a big field and follows the White Way, an ancient trading route, before returning around the upper part of the coombe back into the village. Well, setting off from Rendcomb, there's this magnificent stable block which reminds me somehow of a French architecture. And then a bit further on, you come to a corner, and just beyond the sign for Rendcomb College, there's the gate that takes you into the churchyard. The parish church of St. Peter, Rendcomb, on a lovely sunny day. And this church was built, or should I say rebuilt, on the site of an earlier church in 1517. And it just happens to be the same year that Martin Luther published his famous 95 Theses that ushered in the Protestant Reformation. And just inside the door, there's a wonderful 12th century font. And we'll have a look at that in a moment. Beautiful stained glass window there depicting some of the Easter scenes. And here's the north side of the church. And very interestingly, there is evidence that there may have been another building to the side, another chapel, but for some reason it's disappeared. One of my friends, who's a medieval archaeologist, would like to get to the bottom of this. Well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, here's the wonderful 12th century font, similar to one in Hereford Cathedral, apparently. And two great authorities on this subject, Veery and Brooks, say that the font was brought to the chapel and was previously a garden ornament. And the 12 carved figures around the circular font bowl show the distinctive marks of the 12 apostles, although in place of Judas, there's just an unfinished face. And so this is one of the treasures of Rendcomb Parish Church. The Reverend David Minns and his wife Laura were introduced to leading our benefice back in, I think it was February 2017. And here's David leading Bishop Rachel and the Bishop's chaplain into the church on quite a rainy day. Very appropriately, we had a purple umbrella for her to keep her dry. I said earlier about the Guy's family, and they apparently were very distinguished, a Jewish bullion broker and MP for Reading, and he had the distinction of becoming the first Jewish barrister. But this is really referring not to the church anymore, but the lovely building that you can see there. There's a little snapshot of it. And here we are close up. And apparently the original Rendcomb house was demolished and a new house completed in 1867. And then in 1918, the house and village, as well as the surrounding 450 acres of parkland, was purchased by Wills of tobacco fame in order to establish Rendcomb College. And it's now an independent day and boarding school for boys and girls from age 3 to 18. I've only ever been inside on one or two occasions, but the architecture, particularly in this staircase, is quite spectacular. And it was back in 2015, shortly after Margaret and I arrived, that Bob and Ruth came to serve here in Rendcomb. And there's somebody just noticed peeping between their heads there from behind the flowers. But over on the right-hand side, the picture there shows Robert Springett, the Bishop of Tewkesbury, presenting Bob with his licence. But this wasn't Bob's first time in Rendcomb, and I happened to come across a book a while ago and flipped through it, and at the back I noticed that Bob was actually a pupil here from 1959 to 67, and he's listed with a number of other distinguished former students. One of the interesting things about Rendcomb College was the statue of King Saul. This statue resided in the college from 1865 to only a couple of years ago, and then it was purchased by the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh. And so that's where it's ended up, and no doubt done the school funds a favour along the way. I do hear reports that occasionally the pupils or students would decorate the king with Father Christmas hats and other such things for a bit of fun. The school has a very strong interest in cultivating the arts, and I remember going along with Margaret one summer's evening, but my goodness, the wind was whipping around the side of that building there, and I was very pleased that a couple of years ago, the college opened up a new arts centre. I think that's being very well used and has great potential for the whole area. Just another example of the sort of things that go on at Rendcomb. Thomasina Myers, famous chef, gave a talk there again a couple of years or so ago. So now we're heading back from the college grounds and the church, past the fantastic stable block, and heading down the road towards Chedworth, but only for a couple of 100 yards. And there's a tree stump you can see just on the right, and a gateway that leads through into a public footpath towards the shallow valley that I was mentioning right at the beginning. It was a lovely day when Rob and I were passing through here just at the start of the pandemic. The lambs were out frisking around. We obviously got off our bikes and pushed them down through the field there. Another view across to woodland on the skyline, which is part of the route that I'm going to be describing this morning. On past these trees, and there's a couple of cottages down at the bottom of the hill there. Naughty boy, I think he just got on his bike there for a moment, just for the sake of the photograph. At the bottom of the hill, you find a driveway, and running alongside the driveway, there's this little public footpath over a footbridge. And soon, in open pasture land and looking back towards Rendcomb College. And then from further away, you get a more of a perspective on the area. And the footpath follows the other side of the riverbank. It's a really lovely setting, an idyllic spot. Second time Margaret and I went, it was a very cold winter's day. So here she is, well wrapped up, climbing over one of the stiles back into the woodland. And there's a couple of references there to other footpaths that are following this route, the Monarch Way and the Macmillan Way. I'll say more about that in a few minutes. Here's another aerial view. You'll see how we've come down the shallow valley towards the River Churn, gone back into the woodland, and now the route goes steeply up the side of the hill towards the viewpoint. On one of the occasions we did this walk, the bluebells were out in profusion. And I noticed a huge tree that had fallen over, and yeah, it was quite spectacular really. I think it had only happened a few days before we arrived, and the footpath was blocked actually at that time. I guess by now it'll have been opened up again. So here's Margaret getting close to the viewpoint, which is just beyond the, well, just where that fence is actually. So if you were to turn to the left at that point, you can look out through beyond the gate to the view of Rendcomb, and there's the little red dotted line which shows the route as it started out from Rendcomb. A very nice place just to, again, to sit and have a flask of tea or something. If you were to carry straight on at that crossroads, you'd be on the Monarch's Way, but instead, as Margaret's pointing, you turn right and go through a gate into an absolutely massive field. And the other day when we were up there was an aircraft whizzing around, wing walking, that's it. And I've just highlighted it. It was making a great noise. And the route goes diagonally across the field at this point to meet the White Way. There we are, across the field towards Rendcomb Aerodrome. I think the White Way gets its name from having been an ancient salt route from Droitwich or somewhere like that. It might even go back to Roman times. So being fairly careful to stick to the right-hand side of the road, face the oncoming traffic. There aren't very many cars on the White Way, but they do tend to go at speed because it's such a straight route. The day we were doing this with Nigel and Anne Scotland, Margaret picked up this sign, which we thought was quite amusing for some reason. I think it's because Nigel's such an upright sort of person that there's an irony in putting it next to him. Anyway, a bit further on, going north up the White Way, as you can see, this is a Google image from Google Maps. There's a turning into the Royal Flying Corps, and a bit of history there about how it was set up in the First World War, because there were so many pilots losing their life over the Western Front. And here's a more modern use of the airfield. The Aero Super Biotics wing walking team and the famous Crunchy Flying Circus. Very spectacular to to observe. And if we get really desperate for church funds, I've got 1 or 2 people I'd like to volunteer to stand on top of the aeroplane and raise some money for us. Again, following up the White Way, past some houses, and come to road junction here with the little road coming up from Rendcomb, and I've circled what looks like a bush, but it is actually a signpost pointing out the Monarch's Way. And I should just say that this is quite a strategic point on the White Way, because not only do we have the Monarch's Way, which is a 625-mile footpath, so it must be rivaling the West Coast, Southwest Coast footpath for length, but it relates to Charles II fleeing after the Battle of Worcester. I'd be very interested to meet anybody who'd walked 625 miles like that. But the other one is more modest, but still quite considerable, the Macmillan Way, 290-mile footpath from Abbotsbury on the south coast to Boston in Lincolnshire. And it's created for fundraising purposes by Macmillan Cancer Support. So that shows the 2 routes intersecting at that point. But the White Way continues going north to the right, but instead we turn off down this driveway, which isn't a private driveway, it's a public footpath, and follow it down to the farm and then back across the fields. So this is Green Meadow Farm, which is in a very attractive location, and the footpath actually skirts round to the left of it, and then it comes down across the field. You can see the red arrow there to a fine view of a pond, and just to the left of the pond, hiding in the trees, there's a pump house. But the actual footpath goes through a gate at that point. Looks like Margaret's having a bit of a snooze there. And then into a field, and Margaret actually spotted a hare in this field. Didn't stay for very long, it was off like a shot. And it wasn't that size, I've only in-cut it there just for illustration. Lovely shallow valley, and this is of course the upper end of the combe that we first walked down. Probably in real time that would have been about an hour ago. And just beyond where Margaret's standing, the boggy section of the valley, there's a couple of stepping stones. The stream at the moment is very low, but in winter time that would be a big step for most people, but not impossible, just makes it a bit more exciting. And then up the side of the hill there, various interesting plants. I don't know much about botany, but I've got this gadget on my phone. It's called a Seek app, and you point it at plants or insects, and it will tell you, for example, this one is lady's bedstraw. And what looked to me like a Scotch thistle is in fact a woolly thistle, at least according to the app. But very beautiful and delicate, and says something, I think, of God's creativity and genius, really, of the way things work in nature. Up the banking there, the route goes alongside the hedge and gets a bit involved with the hedge at this point. Passes by a very old-looking stump, gnarled and weather-beaten, and just beyond you can see a stile. That's Margaret climbing over. And then there's one more stile, and before you know it, you're back in the village of Rendcomb, going up by the side of these houses, and reappearing in the village. So there's a little signpost. It's actually quite overgrown now. I think that was a Google image some time ago, but that's looking back the way we've just come. And just for reorientation, at this point we're near the residence car park, and just a few yards away from the village hall.